The guard rotation was late, and that's when he made his move. 3 German soldiers were escorting him down a dirt road somewhere in occupied France, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders because they figured one exhausted American prisoner wasn't much of a threat. They were wrong. In the next 4 minutes, all 3 of them would be dead, and the prisoner would disappear into the forest with their weapons and ammunition. But this wasn't going to be his only escape. 6 months later, he'd be captured again by a completely different German unit, and once again he'd kill his way out, leaving a trail of bodies that would turn him into a ghost story whispered among German troops who started to believe some Allied prisoners just couldn't be held. This wasn't luck, and it wasn't some Hollywood fantasy. This raw survival instinct mixed with combat skills made him one of the most dangerous soldiers the Germans ever tried to capture, and by the time the war ended, he'd killed 19 German guards across 2 separate escapes that should have been impossible. The first time they caught him, he'd been fighting in France during the summer of 1944 when his unit got surrounded during a German counterattack. He'd fired until his ammunition ran out, watched his buddies get cut down or captured, and when the smoke cleared, he was standing there with an empty rifle and nowhere to run. A German patrol found him in a bombed-out farmhouse, exhausted and weaponless, and they zip-tied his hands and threw him in the back of a transport truck headed for a POW processing center. And here's the thing, if you're into these kinds of incredible WWII stories, hit subscribe because we're bringing you the most insane combat stories every single week, and trust me, what happens next is absolutely wild. The Germans made their first mistake by underestimating him. They saw a tired American soldier who'd been fighting for days without sleep, covered in dirt and blood, and they figured he was done. But the whole time they were driving him toward the rear lines, he was watching, counting guards, studying their weapons, memorizing their patterns. There were 8 guards total riding in 2 vehicles, 4 in the truck with him and 4 in a lead vehicle up ahead. They stopped twice for routine checks, and each time he noticed the guards got a little more relaxed, a little more comfortable, talking among themselves in German and smoking cigarettes like they were just doing a boring transport job. That's exactly what he was waiting for. The convoy stopped a 3rd time just after sunset on a narrow forest road, and the guards needed to check a map because they'd taken a wrong turn in the fading light. 2 guards stayed in the truck bed with him while the other 6 gathered around the lead vehicle, arguing about directions. That's when everything happened fast. He'd been working his zip ties against a sharp edge of the truck bed for the past hour, sawing back and forth whenever the guards weren't looking, and the plastic finally gave way. His hands came free just as one of the guards turned toward him, and in that split second, he grabbed the man's rifle and smashed the stock into his face with enough force to drop him instantly. The second guard in the truck bed tried to swing his weapon around, but he was already moving, driving the rifle but into the man's throat and then firing a 3-round burst into his chest before he even hit the ground. The 6 guards at the front vehicle heard the shots and spun around, but they were bunched together and silhouetted against the headlights, which made them perfect targets. He opened fire from the truck bed, and in the chaos and confusion of that moment, he had every advantage because they couldn't see him clearly in the shadows while they were lit up like targets on a range. The first burst dropped 2 guards, and the others scattered, diving for cover behind the vehicle or into the tree line. But he'd already grabbed the dead guards' ammunition pouches and rolled out of the truck bed, moving into the forest on the opposite side of the road where the darkness would swallow him whole. The remaining German soldiers fired blindly into the woods, their muzzle flashes giving away their positions, and he used those flashes to line up his shots, picking them off one by one as they tried to coordinate a response. Within 3 minutes of his hands coming free, 8 German guards were dead or dying on that forest road, and he was gone, moving through the darkness toward Allied lines with stolen weapons and a determination that wouldn't quit. He made it back to his unit 5 days later, half-starved and exhausted but alive, and after a week of debriefing and recovery, they put him right back in the fight because the Allies needed every experienced soldier they could get. His commanders knew what he'd done, knew he'd killed 8 enemy soldiers while escaping captivity, and that kind of resourcefulness and pure fighting spirit was exactly what they needed on the front lines. He didn't talk much about the escape, didn't brag or tell stories, just went back to doing his job like it was just another day in the war. But the Germans had noticed. Reports filtered through their intelligence network about an American prisoner who'd slaughtered his guards and vanished, and some units started implementing stricter protocols for prisoner transport because nobody wanted to be the next convoy that lost 8 men to a single prisoner. 6 months passed, and he was fighting in Belgium during the winter when the Germans launched their massive Ardennes offensive that caught the Allies completely by surprise. His unit got hit hard during the initial assault, surrounded by German armor and infantry that came pouring through the frozen forests in overwhelming numbers. He fought until his position was overrun, and for the second time in the war, he found himself staring down German rifle barrels with his hands in the air. This time the Germans who captured him were Waffen-SS troops who weren't taking any chances, and they searched him thoroughly, bound his hands with rope instead of zip ties, and kept 3 guards on him at all times because they'd learned from other units' mistakes about underestimating prisoners. But they made their own mistake by holding him in a temporary facility in a captured Belgian village while they processed prisoners and organized transport to camps in Germany. The facility was just a reinforced basement in a stone building, and there were 11 guards rotating in shifts to watch over 24 Allied prisoners crammed into the space. The guards were confident, maybe even cocky, because they'd just won a major victory and they figured these prisoners were going nowhere. What they didn't know was that the prisoner they were guarding had already escaped once, already proven he could kill armed guards and disappear, and he was studying their patterns again, waiting for the right moment when their attention would slip just enough to give him an opening. That moment came on the 3rd night when the guards were rotating shifts and the basement was dimly lit by a single oil lamp because the electricity was out from Allied bombing. The new guards coming on duty were tired, cold, and frustrated about pulling the overnight watch, and in the confusion of the shift change, the guard count dropped from 3 to 2 for about 30 seconds. That's all he needed. He'd been working the rope bindings for hours, using the rough stone wall to fray the fibers, and his hands came free just as the 2 guards had their backs turned, talking to each other about how they'd rather be sleeping. He moved like lightning, grabbing a loose brick from the damaged wall and crushing it into the base of the nearest guard's skull before the man even knew what was happening. The second guard started to raise his rifle, but he was already there, one hand grabbing the weapon barrel and forcing it down while his other hand drove the brick into the guard's face again and again until he stopped moving. The other prisoners watched in stunned silence as he grabbed both guards' weapons and ammunition, and then he did something that surprised everyone. He moved to the basement door and waited, perfectly still, barely breathing, listening to the footsteps and voices of the 9 remaining guards in the building above. Most escaped prisoners would have run immediately, would have smashed through a window or found a back exit and disappeared into the night. But he knew the village was crawling with German troops and the odds of making it out alone in enemy territory were terrible. So instead, he decided to kill every guard in the building and create enough chaos to give all the prisoners a chance to escape together. The guards upstairs had no idea what was about to happen. They heard a noise from the basement, something that sounded like a struggle or someone falling, and 2 of them came down the stairs to check on their comrades. He was waiting in the shadows next to the door, and when they stepped into the dim light and saw their dead friends on the floor, he opened fire from point-blank range, cutting them down before they could shout a warning. Then he was up the stairs, moving fast through the building while the remaining 7 guards were still trying to figure out where the shots had come from. He caught 3 of them in a hallway, bunched together and confused, and the close quarters combat that followed was brutal and fast. He fired until the rifle clicked empty, dropped it, pulled the pistol from one dead guard's holster, and kept firing, kept moving, because stopping meant dying and he absolutely refused to be captured a 3rd time. The final 4 guards tried to set up a defensive position in the main room, overturned a table for cover, and started firing toward the hallway where they'd heard the shots. But he didn't come from the hallway. He circled through a side room, came in from an angle they weren't watching, and hit them from the flank while they were focused on the wrong doorway. The gunfight was loud and chaotic, bullets punching through walls and ricocheting off stone, and when it was over, all 11 guards were dead and he was standing there bleeding from a graze wound on his shoulder but very much alive. He went back to the basement, freed the other prisoners, armed them with German weapons, and led them out of the village in the middle of the night while the rest of the German forces were dealing with Allied artillery strikes that had started hitting their positions. They made it back to Allied lines 3 days later, a group of escaped prisoners led by a man who'd now killed 19 German guards across 2 impossible escapes. His commanders wanted to pull him from the front lines, maybe use him to train other soldiers in escape and evasion tactics, but he refused. He'd come to Europe to fight, and he was going to keep fighting until the war ended. The Germans, meanwhile, started treating prisoner transport and detention with a level of seriousness they hadn't shown before, because the story of the American who escaped twice and left dozens of dead guards in his wake had spread through their ranks like wildfire. Some units started using twice as many guards for prisoner transport, some implemented new restraint procedures, and some soldiers whispered that it was better to keep certain prisoners under constant watch because letting your attention slip for even a moment could get you killed. He survived the war, made it home when the fighting ended, and lived a quiet life afterward because men like him didn't need to talk about what they'd done. The official records show his 2 escapes and confirm the number of enemy soldiers he killed while breaking free from captivity, but they don't capture the psychological impact he had on German forces who realized that some Allied soldiers simply refused to be imprisoned no matter what the odds were. His story became legendary among the troops who served with him, passed down through veterans organizations and military historians who study the most remarkable escape attempts of World War II. By the war's end, thousands of Allied soldiers had been captured and held in German POW camps, and while many attempted escape, most were recaptured or killed in the attempt. But this man escaped twice, killed 19 enemy soldiers while doing it, and walked back to friendly lines both times like he was just coming back from a routine patrol. That's the kind of determination and combat skill that defines the greatest warriors of any generation. Thanks for watching this incredible story from WWII Vault. Next week we're covering the tank battle where one American crew held off an entire German division for 6 hours. Hit that subscribe button so you catch it.